it's like 20 years old.
Yeah, so valuation fee would be.
I gotta check mine too, just in case. I don't want to be the guy who violates my own rule. All right, so I will call the regular meeting of the City Commission to order for Wednesday, November 15th, 2017. We did have an executive session prior to the City Commission meeting pursuant to ORS 192-662H to consult with counsel concerning legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Shaw?
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Here.
Commissioner Mengelberg? Here. Commissioner Ide is absent this evening. Mayor Holliday?
Here. Commissioner Ide is attending the National League of Cities in Charlotte this week, so. So moving on, if you all stand and join me in the flag salute, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So our first thing is a proclamation declaring November 20th through 25th, 2017 as Oregon City Buy Local Week, and Saturday, November 25th, 2017 as Oregon City Buy Local Small Business Saturday. Before I read the proclamation, I understand there are a couple of folks from either the Chamber or Downtown Oregon City that wish to speak.
Danielle Walsh and Jonathan Stone.
So I have, why is that not showing up on my screen?
Good. Have a seat, Daniel.
Yeah. So I have Danielle Walsh and who?
Jonathan.
Oh, Jonathan Stone.
Sure.
What happened?
How's it going?
How nice to see you. Now I feel more comfortable. My name is Danielle Walsh, and I am the owner of White Rabbit Gifts and Black Ink Coffee, and I'm here to talk about what buying local means to me, probably as a person and as a business owner here in Oregon City. First of all, I believe that more money is recycled into the community when we purchase locally, and local families have that money to reinvest. So whether I'm hanging out with Karen Roy down at Mesa Fresca and having lunch like I did today, buying my couch from Home Life Furniture with Robert, that money is invested into our community again and again through small business. Nonprofits in the area benefit from small businesses. About 250 times the revenue is made by small businesses for nonprofits. I personally am a board member for Parrot Creek Child and Family Services. I volunteer my time with DOCA, and I donate to many nonprofits here in Oregon City. I think that shopping small creates a unique local community. So to me, Oregon City is a little like Stars Hollow in the Gilmore Girls. That main street that you walk down with the lights and is inviting with small indie businesses and families that are owner operated. I was co-hosting Localopolis with the Main Street organization. So we included makers to come down and for free set up small pop-ups inside businesses. We did maps for the local community to get to those people. And then we had people inside our shops, sometimes for the first time. And those type of events are things that I'm invested in. And I think what makes Oregon City unique and a destination, not only for community members, but for tourists as well. Shopping local reduces environmental impact. So our milk that we use in the coffee shop, we buy from Gary's Meadow Fresh. They are free-range Jersey cows hanging out up there in Malino. Milk in glass bottles that you got to shake in order to get to the cream to the bottom. It's a much smaller carbon footprint when you purchase from local people. White Rabbit purchases from over 300 local artists and small businesses to keep businesses and jobs in this area. Creating jobs ourselves. We thought that we would start with 2 jobs for the City of Oregon City, who invested in us through the Urban Renewal Grant. We're at 13 and still hiring. That's great. Yeah. And what we like to do is invest in people that are trying to get places. So we pay higher than the minimum wage, and we're trying to stay way ahead of it. We're trying to make a living wage for our people, and we're also very invested in getting people where they need to go. We have students from MIT, Lewis and Clark, Clackamas Community, and Portland State. We have parents working for us. We're willing to work around schedules and school and kids, and I think that's what small businesses do. And investing in the community. So I hope y'all think this is funny that I'm hosting a meeting right now called Meeting of the Makers. It is to help local people get started selling direct consignment or wholesale what they make. And somebody has taken my place currently, and I'm going to go back and continue teaching that class. And that is another way that I am trying to invest in this community and why I think it is important to shop local and small.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your business there, too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Jonathan?
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Stone. I'm the Executive Director of the Downtown Oregon City Association, as well as a resident of Oregon City. So Eric asked me to say a few words today on behalf of Small Business, or Buy Local Week, but as well as Small Business Saturday. I just wanted to share a few things with you related to that. First off, I'm not sure if we've made any announcement. I know I sent you guys an email when it became a public knowledge that we were a finalist for the Great American Main Street Award, which the reason I'm sharing that is because one of the reasons that we were told by the staff member of the organization that awards that award is one of the things that stood out was our high rate of independent businesses in our downtown. So Danielle mentioned a number of the things that DOCA has been involved with respect to small business and sort of the character of small business in downtown Oregon City. But I do want to share that starting on Small Business Saturday will be our fourth Snowflake raffle. This year we're focusing it on downtown Oregon City with just a 1-week promotion, and the idea is focused energy, and then hopefully we'll be able to get a pretty big turnout, or an even bigger turnout at the tree lighting ceremony this year, where hopefully we might bribe Santa into pulling out the winners of the Snowflake Raffle awards. Then, as well as kind of right in this time frame, just after Small Business Saturday on that Wednesday, I believe, we're hosting what's called an Entrepreneurial Ecosystems workshop, and that is going to be facilitated by the National Main Street Center, and they will be helping us to figure out some kind of pilot program in downtown for the first half of 2018 that will help us fine-tune, growing entrepreneurship in downtown Oregon City, whether that is starting new businesses or growing the existing businesses that we have. And so I look forward to reporting on what that group comes up with. But there's a number of stakeholders in this room that will be participating in that process. But anyways, the Downtown Oregon City Association is obviously very supportive of small businesses, and we thank the Commission and all of your support in helping to grow small businesses in Oregon City.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I will now read the proclamation. Whereas Buy Local Oregon City seeks to bring the local community together to support economic vitality and the quality of life in Oregon City, and wishes to celebrate the independence of citizens of Oregon City and the entrepreneurial spirit represented by our core of local independent businesses. And whereas the individual decisions every community member makes today affect the future of Oregon City, and whereas Oregon City's local independent businesses help preserve the uniqueness of the community and give us a sense of place, and whereas Oregon City's core of independently owned businesses give back to this community in goods, services, time, and talent, and whereas the health of our Oregon City economy depends on our support of businesses owned by our friends and neighbors, and whereas Oregon City's independent business owners and employees enrich the community members' shopping experience with their knowledge and passion, now therefore I, Dan Holliday, Mayor of Oregon City, do hereby proclaim the week of November 20th through 25th, 2017 as Oregon City Buy Local Week, and Saturday, November 25th as Oregon City Buy Local Small Business Saturday, and salute our community members and locally owned independent businesses who are integral to the unique flavor of Oregon City, and honor their efforts to make Oregon City the place we want to live, work, and shop. Also urging the residents of our community and communities across the country to support small businesses and merchants on Small Business Saturday and throughout the year. In which hereof, I hereunto set my hand this 15th day of November 2017, Dan Holliday, Mayor. There we go. Pass that down, Katie. Okay, so back to the agenda. 317-584 Tourism Strategic Plan Project Midpoint Update Presentation by the Coragio Group. Mr. Underwood.
Thank you, Mayor. We have been working hard on tourism, and we are now at the midpoint of our effort in creating the tourism strategy. But Leanne Hogue, our Economic Development Coordinator, is the lead on this project, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her.
Thank you, Eric. Mayor and Commissioners, I'm very excited to be here tonight for our mid-project update on our tourism strategic plan. Tourism is one of our economic priorities from the Commission for Economic Development. It's a $10 billion industry in Oregon, and we want to capture some of that here in Oregon City. So we're 5 months into our process. I'm not going to steal what Coraggio Group is going to tell us tonight, but what I do want to say is that we've had a lot of stakeholder engagement the past 5 months, and I think that we've come to a really great spot where we're about to draft our strategic plan and bring that to you for review. Right now, this is really a check-in on where we are and what we've done the past few months, but we've had a lot of stakeholders involved from various different aspects of tourism, and I'm just really excited about where we've gotten to. So I'm going to pass this over to Coraggio Group. We have 3 presenters, so we're going to pull up another chair for them, and I'll take a step back. But I'll hand it over to Matthew Lancomber, Bo Bennett, and Colin Stetzel from Coraggio Group.
Thank you, Leanne. Mr. Mayor, members of the Commission, thank you for having us back. Last time we joined you, we were over in the library, so you must be glad to be back with the home court advantage tonight.
Name and city of residence for the record, please.
City of residence for the record. My city of residence is Portland.
And your first and last name?
Matthew Lankamp.
Thank you.
From Coraggio Group. So we, as Leanne indicated, we're here to give our midpoint check-in. We have been busy, as Eric indicated, with a lot of stakeholders throughout the city from various tourism-related businesses and other organizations who have an interest in the economic development impacts of tourism. Our project has 2 parallel tracks, as we talked about last time. One is the strategic planning portion, where we're sort of setting a long-term strategy for Oregon City to promote itself to tourism. And at the same time, there's a marketing and branding track that really is in the shorter term aimed at setting the stage for the execution of the grant that was received from Travel Oregon. It will set the stage for longer term work as well, but the big focus of it is on that nearer term piece and executing that. So we're really glad to be here. We're excited to share a little bit. We have made a lot of progress. We're at a point where things aren't finalized yet, so we're not going to share much product tonight, but we're going to tell you about what we've been up to and where those things are in process, and they'll be coming soon. And next time we see you, we will have a lot of product to share. So I'm going to turn it over to Bo to talk about where we are in the process, and he'll take it from there.
Hi, I'm Bo Bennett with Coraggio Group. I live in Beaverton.
Okay.
So we want to start off tonight by talking about just a rough overview of our project timeline. I don't know who's controlling the... Oh, okay.
There we go.
So as you can see, we started in June, July timeframe. I believe we were here in August for our initial check-in. Just as a reminder, our work started with doing a kind of what we call an immersion, basically getting familiar with the current state of things in Oregon City around tourism. Then we did a pretty broad stakeholder survey where we surveyed online a bunch of people from the tourism industry, as well as a lot of residents of the city. We came here and met with you. We held a stakeholder visioning retreat, which was a kind of a high-level visioning session involving a lot of stakeholders from across the tourism industry to get broad input into our plan. And that's kind of where we were, just as overview, last time we talked. Since then, we have spent quite a bit of time, mostly in this room, with a group of about 20 stakeholders representing different sectors of the tourism industry in Oregon City. A good cross-section, and we've spent 5 meetings, 5 very exciting 3-hour meetings, working through our strategic planning framework from vision down to kind of strategic initiatives. And then we're at the point now where we've kind of, with that group, started to develop and hone in on our draft strategic plan, and we're going back out to some of the stakeholders we engaged early in the process to get additional input into that draft and start socializing it and start developing some of the kind of what are some of the implications, what are some of the things that we're going to have have in place to start implementing that plan.
On the parallel track,
and on the parallel track.
On the parallel track, we've had a series of 4 meetings on the marketing and branding side. also mostly in this room, with a smaller group, that the larger group sort of tasked or empowered to go work on this marketing and branding piece. A couple of representatives from DOCA on there, a couple of representatives from city staff. So it's a more focused work group, but we've been developing some brand perception sorts of position pieces, rather, that we'll share, Colin will share a framework of with you in a moment.
Okay. So we'll talk about next steps, but I want to talk you a little bit through our framework and the elements of the strategic plan that we've been working with the strategic planning team with. So if you see on the screen, the elements kind of labeled clarity, the things on the left, vision, mission, reputation, and position are strategic anchors, and these are kind of define the direction of the plan, while the strategic imperative objectives and initiatives really define what it is we're going to be doing with the plan. So if you start at the upper left, work your way down from vision, mission, all the way down to initiatives on the lower right, you can kind of think of these as decreasing in altitude from the highest, most visionary kind of strategic level to kind of getting more down to the tactical. So when we spoke about vision with the team, really thinking about what is the future state of the tourism industry in Oregon City. What are we trying to create via tourism in Oregon City? And the mission is, how are we going to work together as a tourism community to make that vision come to life? The stakeholders that we've engaged in our planning team had some great discussions around making sure that there's balance in vision for tourism, making sure that tourism is not overriding some of the local interests. Tourism has great economic benefit, but as some of our participants have noted, there's also a downside to tourism, and that is tourists. And so how do we balance that and maintain the livability and the uniqueness of Oregon City while still benefiting from the tourism industry? So we also spoke about reputation and position. So reputation is, as we like to say, kind of the enduring emotion or perception that you want to kind of convey via Oregon City. And so that is, when somebody comes as a tourist to the city, what would you expect them to say to their friends about how it felt to be here? This is a very kind of emotional sense, and it helps set up some of the brand work that Colin and Matthew have been doing, and helps us kind of frame how we want to position ourselves as a destination. The position is a little more concrete, and that is kind of what is the unique sustainable value that we deliver. So what is it that differentiates Oregon City as a tourism destination that we can leverage in order to promote the city and draw in tourists? And what makes us different from other similar, there's nothing quite the same, but other similar cities and other regional destinations. So that's our strategic clarity. Around strategic imperatives, objectives, and initiatives, this is getting into the work that needs to happen over the planning horizon. So the strategic imperatives are kind of the large buckets of activities. What are the big things that need to happen within kind of the tourism community in order to make tourism happen, to promote tourism and really drive things forward? The objectives are how we would measure success in those areas. So how do we know that we're moving forward and we're actually making an impact where we want to be making an impact? And the initiatives are what are the action steps? What are the individual things we're moving towards? So the discussion with the planning team really, it was challenging, not gonna lie, but very productive, because we're talking about developing a strategic plan for an organization that is still kind of nebulous and is not a official organization right now. It's a loose affiliation of stakeholders. And so some of the initial work that we're going to be talking about over the next couple months, which Colin will talk to, is what does a tourism organization look like, and how is that funded in Oregon City? How do we prop up some leadership structure to ensure that these other things on the plan actually can happen, and this doesn't just fall flat, and that we can actually implement these things and drive things forward. So Colin's going to talk through kind of where we are and what we have planned next for the rest of the year and the rest of the project.
Thank you, Bo. My name is Colin Stetzel. I'm a senior analyst with Coraggio. I currently reside in Portland. So thank you for having me here, Commissioner and Mayor. Bo covered some of this, but this is just a general outline or timeline, if you will, of what we envision the next steps to be. I would say going into the holiday season, this is a desired state and might shift a little out as we do have a large stakeholder group involved in the process, and people have families. So we're at the point now where we just wrapped up initiatives, as Bo said, and we're in the point of drafting a strategic plan. Once we have that draft, we wanted to, as Bo also said, go out and socialize the plan and gather feedback from the stakeholders. Let them know what we've arrived at and get some insights and some comments that we can then take back to a revision session. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to that revision session because it's very much correlated to this feedback. Once we hear from the community, we'll probably go out to the same broad community base that we did with the survey and solicit feedback on this draft plan. We will then take that 20-person strategic planning team and take into consideration those inputs and start tweaking to the extent that we can where we've already arrived. This is not a point in time to start over. That would not be that great. But to fine tune and make sure the community can see themselves in the plan to also enable buy-in and get the community really behind this, because the community is your tourism, and without them, this plan does fall flat. So in between that, we're going to be working on what you see on the board as organizational and financial structure assistance. This is what Bo is talking to about. What are the potential organization or governance structures that can put this plan into action? How do we empower it? What does it look like? And in addition to that, what are some of the economic implications of that plan? And how do those economic implications influence potential financial structures or models? So we can actually see over time how this plays out. And that'll give us further guidance on how this organizational structure may stand up. From there, once we have those things in order and this revision session complete, we'll be able to come to a final strategic plan that we can all get behind and share out. And then after that, it's where the rubber meets the road. And we have planned after January to really help Eric and Leanne and the rest of the team think about the priorities in this plan and how do things chronically lay out to make sense most strategically in both the evolution of tourism and the resources that we have to our disposal. So that's what the next 3 months look like, and that's what the remainder of the plan looks like. A lot of these things will come into more detail as we get into these meetings and start asking some of these questions around organizational structure and financial assistance. Financial frameworks, and then strategic priority. And I would imagine we'll come back and share that with you all then. At the beginning of this, Matthew alluded to there is this other track going on. And that track is specifically to a marketing or brand experience for Travel Oregon. Sorry, Oregon City is there today. So first off, when we think about brand, you'll see when we drafted this brand brief, we like to segment it into two parts. One is the head and one is the heart of the brand. The head is the attributes, attractions, and trends. They're your hard assets. They're the things that you can touch. The head is the emotional side. It's the preferences, it's the sentiments that you want people to feel, and it's the overall tone that comes off. Some people, think about it as shapes and colors, but it's just what resonates on the heart side of the consumer. So we took a stab at that with the group using a lot of the input we got from the visioning session, and we think we came to a really good spot, which we'll share out later. Another part of that, which also is influenced by a few things, including the visioning session and a variety of demographic studies and tourism trends, we started thinking about who are these draft personas? Who are our target visitors that might, when we think about this brand and we think about Oregon City and this plan, might be the people we want to target to drive tourism in the city. Rolling all that up, we are now at a part where we're starting to really ideate around what a key experience might be. And when I say key experience, I mean one thing to focus on in the short term that we can think about, the capacity we have currently, what assets are ready to go, and the ability to implement within the next year. Doing the strategic plan, we identified that you got to crawl before you walk, and this is kind of that part where we're identifying what's an early win. There's still some ideation to go on about this, but we feel we're coming to something that is going to be a good start for Oregon City in this tourism industry. With that said, Matthew's going to take you through the next steps of the marketing and brand.
Thanks, Colin. Again, Matthew Langhammer, Portland. So there are two colors on this for the different pieces of work, and remind you that part of the work that we've been contracted for is to help Oregon City select a marketing agency to implement this key experience and to provide some oversight and implementation assistance for that. So the different colors represent, the blue is all the Coraggio work, but I wanted to call out in the green there the agency work. That's coming soon. So we are, as Colin just indicated, right now at finalizing the brand brief. Those pieces that he walked us through are all the component parts of this brand brief, which you would be able to hand over to an agency. You will be able to hand over to an agency, and it'll give them enough guidance to then put together a campaign based on their understanding of what the brand of the city is, who our target market is, and what this key experience, what the parameters of that key experience need to be. Once we've got the team all aligned on that, we're driving to consensus. Once we've got that consensus, then we're hoping to quickly release an agency RFP to solicit proposals from potential marketing agencies. Ideally, I would like to have that happen by Thanksgiving. I don't know if that's possible or not, but we will we'll get it done as quickly as we can, with the idea that we'd like to spend some time in December reviewing proposals. We'd like to give them enough time to respond and still have time before the first of the year to do a proposal review and form a short list. That would allow us to hold agency interviews in January and target an agency to begin work by mid-February.
So who's going to be doing the interviews?
It's to be determined. I imagine that the Economic Development Department is going to be the lead on that, but I'll ask Eric to verify.
You know, we haven't really discussed that yet, but that you're assuming correctly. Yeah, we would be the lead.
I think a member of the commission ought to be part of that process.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Assuming an agency can begin work somewhere in that February-March timeframe, giving them a few months to work, we're sort of setting a very tentative key experience launch date at the end of May, beginning of June, which get it done in time for summer, in time for that season where it could be potentially the most impactful. During that whole span of time, while they're developing the key experience, our job will be to work with the Economic Development Department to oversee that. So that's that bracket on the bottom, agency oversight and implementation assistance. So while the strategic plan is in its final stages and being rolled out, we'll also be doing this piece on the marketing and brand side. So that is what the future holds as best as we can prognosticate. And with that, we'll take questions.
I'll be glad to ask.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
That was a very skeletal plan. It's like an operational plan on what we intend to do. There's no details whatsoever. What is our brand? I mean, what are our attributes? What attractions are we offering?
We have drafted all of those
Give me
items.
an overview.
I think at this time, because we're waiting for our team to sort of come to consensus on it, we just handed out the draft within the past couple of days.
And hopefully historical nature of the city is among those?
Yes.
I mean, that's what differentiates us from the rest of the world, right?
We definitely recognize the historical nature of the city. Whether or not the final key experience will focus on that is to be determined. I can say that it will focus on assets that are ready to go in Oregon City. We don't have time to get something up and running, so we're gonna ask the agency to focus on assets that are present and ready to go.
So when I think of assets, I think about our historical houses. I think about Ermatinger House. I know we barely got it ready to do a weekend opening. Are we moving on that? I mean, we've got a long time frame. You're talking about assets bringing to bear. I mean, I presume Phil Lewis and Parks Department are part of your group and are providing input. I presume the people that run houses like Ermatinger House are involved. Is that an unwarranted assumption?
There are people from the historical asset community as part of the group.
Matthew,
Colin,
if I may interject.
Sure, please.
We have a broad spectrum on the group. We have people from the heritage areas. We have people that are from the typical tourism groups around Oregon City, the people that are part of the Ermatinger House. We have outside partnering agencies, tourism agencies that are involved with this. We have general interested community members on there who have been here for a long time, who are very interested in tourism. We have some folks, we do have Phil Lewis, he's part of our planning team. We have Christina Robinson Gardner with the Heritage Preservation, and we have some recreational tourism representation on that as well.
Which leads me to my final question. If one of the ultimate goal is to select a marketing agency, we want to select a marketing agency that specializes in what we're marketing. I mean, if we're marketing a fishing community, we want that guy. If we're marketing historical, we want that guy. So maybe I don't understand the nature of the presentation. Maybe it's the 40,000 foot level, and I'll leave it to you, but I sit here and I'm just that detail guy that you don't want to deal with tonight. But I didn't get anything.
So,
okay, I got your operational plan, but that's all I got.
Commissioner, if I may interject here real quick, I have wanted the presentation to be this way just to give you an idea of where we are in the process and what we've been doing as far as the steps. Didn't want to get into the details of the draft of the plan because it hasn't been vetted internally yet. We haven't had a chance to review it, and we want to be able to answer any questions you might have of the plan once you review it.
Okay, so we saw an outline on operational intent. Okay,
yeah, so the next meeting when Coraggio Group comes back, you will have had a chance to review the draft plan, and then we will get more into the details of the draft plan. You'll be able to ask questions at that point.
Thank you, sir.
And if I may, Mr. O'Donnell, too, I just want to clarify one thing. You asked if the ultimate goal is to select a marketing agency, and that is one goal of our work.
It's a stepping stone to the final goal.
Correct. But I don't want to lose sight of, and I want to make sure you don't lose sight of, the strategic plan setting a course for how the governance and cooperation is going to continue to promote tourism in Oregon City over the longer term, over many years. This one key experience will be something that happens in 2018, probably, based on that on the Travel Oregon grant, and that's what the agency is being chosen for that particular piece. But I also just want to make sure we keep our eyes on the prize of setting a longer-term sort of stability platform for promoting tourism here.
And my perspective is I don't want to plan and plan and plan and never execute. There's an end point. I want it to happen. I want to get it online. I want it to generate tourism.
And I believe we're doing both.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I know earlier on in previous discussions about allocating resources to do this plan, one of the core reasons to pause and to reallocate resources was to get all of the various tourism providers together, working together in a coordinated way, because in the past everybody had kind of done their own thing and they weren't maximizing the opportunity. So I'm hoping that the plan that we eventually see is very heavily about that.
You want to speak to that?
Yeah, I would say that, when we started this process, your kind of description of how it used to be was it was in the room. It was something we saw. And I would like to say that throughout the process, we have seen this large stakeholder group with varying interests from a large representation really come together and have some great aha moments about becoming a more unified tourism industry. So I just want to say I think that's something that really we saw evolve throughout this process, just from the people in the room and the conversations and the aha moments that we would come to.
Great, thank you.
And I would also add that we understood right from the beginning that was part of our role. That was part of our charge, was to drive to consensus and bring those voices together. And so the process has been designed to do that.
Good.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
So we move on to citizen comments. Do we have anybody, Katie? Okay. As I mentioned earlier before the meeting, I'm moving up agenda item 7A to right now. So if everybody's okay with that, the agendas are right, then we're going to hear under a heading of general business, 17-606 purchase and sale agreement. Wrong one, sorry. 17602, resolution 17-27 calling for a public hearing for the continuation of an economic improvement district. Mr. Underwood.
Thank you, Mayor. So in order to continue the assessment of the economic improvement district longer than what was specified initially in the ordinance, the commission needs to enact a new ordinance with a provision for continued assessments within the specified number of years. In this case, it would be 4 years. Granting to the property owners in the district the notice and right to remonstrate described in ORS 223. So this is basically to pass a resolution to give notice that we plan to hold a public hearing to renew the Economic Improvement District in Oregon City. So
What action do you need?
I need approval of the resolution, adoption of the resolution.
Anybody have questions?
We have a speaker.
Oh, we have a speaker?
Yeah. Jonathan Stone.
Mr. Stone, come on up.
Two times in one night. So anyways, the Economic Improvement District, I just want to share a few things about why this is in front of you now. As you know, the Economic Improvement District is something that was started out of an effort kind of in the early days of the Main Street organization, which we now know as Downtown Oregon City. And so it's been in place since 2000. It'll be a total of 2011. Sometimes I think it's 2012, but I feel like I was just up here yesterday presenting to you all about the Economic Improvement District. I do have a letter that was submitted in your packet from the president of our board, Carol Pauley. I just wanted to go over that briefly, just on sort of the primary themes. As you know, the Economic Improvement District did not, on its last renewal, did not pass the first time, and we had to renegotiate that with the property owners in the district. And this time around, we've taken some of what we learned that last time and wanted to make sure that what we brought to you was something that has general support from the district. As you know, as you likely know, that the process requires a remonstrance. There's an opportunity for remonstrance from property owners after the first hearing. And if there's more than 33% that object, then the Economic Improvement District is not allowed to be formed. With that in mind, we shopped around a proposal which includes a slight expansion of the footprint and dividing the district up into 3 zones. And we believe that is a fair way to provide assessment so that the people that are in the sort of pedestrian heavy area, sort of essentially from 99 to 10th or the transit center, are experiencing a different kind of benefit than property owners that are maybe further out from that central area. And in terms of what DOCA has done with the funds that the EID has raised over the past going on 7 years, we've provided approximately $2.43 million in services. When the Economic Improvement District was first formed, we were about at a $1 investment on top of every EID dollar that was raised. And this year we're looking at about $5 investment on top of every EID dollar that was raised. And that's dollars flowing through our organization. That doesn't account for the other stuff that we've helped bring to the table. And so we're striving very hard to maintain that investment ratio, so to speak. With the effort that we've gone out to talk to the property owners, and we've had some objections, and Carol's conversations with them is not necessarily out of whether or not there's support for the work that the organization's doing, but the potential raise in the cap that we're proposing was maybe a little bit too high. And so we're prepared to come back at the next hearing with a proposal that sort of backs off a little bit on what we shopped around, even though we believed what we shopped around would pass. We're confident that this process will work the first time, and that we have the general support of the property owners in the district.
Thank you. Questions?
Did the previous, like last year, did it have the different levels of contribution here in the blue, orange, yellow colors here? Is that last year's, or are you just doing it this year?
When we went to reevaluate the district this time, we looked at other examples in the state, and it's common for there to be tiered investment. And if we were thinking about the original Economic Improvement District did include properties around, the Abernathy Center, Tony's, and whatnot. And when we renewed it last time, we pulled those out because those property owners didn't necessarily see value in the district. And so when we went back to revisit it this time, we went to them first, and we were like, hey, are you interested in being brought in? And several of the key property owners over there have expressed support for that. in terms of the zoning, I think that was one way for us to achieve that support from those further out property owners. And then in terms of the rate structure that we're prepared to come back to you all with at the first hearing, that's a similar structure that is used in McMinnville and other downtowns that have an economic improvement district. It's a little bit more. It evens out the assessment from building to building, so that if somebody hasn't been reassessed in years, but they're enjoying similar rent benefits from retailers and stuff like that, that they're paying, on par with buildings that maybe are more highly assessed, so that it divorces essentially the EID rate structure as much as possible from property values.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve 17-602, resolution number 17-27, calling for a public hearing for the continuation of an economic improvement district.
Second.
Further discussion? Call a roll, please.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Mengelberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
Mayor Holliday?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we are on to public hearings. Our first public hearing tonight is PC 17-138, AP 17-04, appeal of the Historic Review Board's August 22nd, 2017 decision to approve the designs of 6 cottage-style homes in the Kadima Historic District. Ms. Turway.
Thank you very much. Assistant City Attorney Carrie Richter will give our disclosures.
A public hearing on a land use matter is scheduled for tonight. A staff report has been prepared and has been made available to the public, 7 days before tonight's hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to this proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria along with written comments and input received through the public notification process that occurred before the Historic Review Board. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure the commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown in the chart right there, except for we're going to hear from the appellants first. The Historic Review Board has recommended approval of this application, and the matter is now before the City Commission. This Commission's review is on the record, so argument is allowed, but no new evidence. Also, testimony will be limited to the issues raised in the notice of appeal, and only those individuals withstanding, those folks who participated before the Historic Review Board, will be allowed to testify. Anyone who wishes to speak in this matter should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the city recorder. Speakers will proceed in the order in which their card is received. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and whether you reside or have a business within the city. Argument should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. A person may submit any written material while the public record is open, so long that it does not contain new evidence. This evening, I'm going to interrupt folks who are testifying and ask them to identify where their materials are in the record, and I'm going to ask city staff to help me in that regard. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If the City Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you wish to appeal must have been raised for the Commission's consideration. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient specificity and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond, the issue will not be judged appealable to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, revised statute 197796 requires us to announce the following. The failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. At this point, I'm going to ask if any commissioner has any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare.
No.
Nope.
I do not.
No.
Has any commissioner visited the site?
I have.
Yes.
Does any person from the audience wish to question any commissioner regarding these representations? Seeing none, we will now commence with the staff report.
Thank you, Ms. Richter. Mayor Holliday, City Commissioners. Tonight, I'd like to lay out some of the facts for this appeal, and then when we get to the staff analysis, I'll send it back to our Assistant City Attorney, Carrie Richter. As we said tonight, this hearing is on the record. There are two exhibits this evening. One is an exhibit on your dais from Karen Blaha, a neighbor. She has standing and has submitted a secondary letter as part of the appeal. The second exhibit is from Christine Kaczynski. That actually needs to be stricken from the record. She does not have appeal, and so it is not on your dais. But it was dropped off at the city offices this afternoon. And staff double-checked, and she does not have standing in this situation. So you do not have this letter
Actually,
available.
we do.
It is, and
It's on the dais monitor, but it's going to be stricken from the record.
Please don't read it.
Please don't read it.
It's too late.
No, we'll include it in the motion.
Okay. So your options this evening: if the City Commission agrees with the Historic Review Board's decision, staff recommend that the City Commission deny the appeal and approve the application with the HRB findings as part of the decision. If you determine that the Historic Review Board erred in its deliberations and findings, you can either deny the appeal and provide staff additional findings, and we will come back in December 6th, meeting with those additional findings, or you can find that the Historic Review Board erred in the deliberations, but you feel that there are additional conditions of approval that can be added to make the application compatible. And we will again return back on December 6th. Staff recommends that the City Commission provide a tentative decision tonight.
So to be clear for everybody here, this is just the HRB decision. So it doesn't have anything to do with something, you know, the follow-on process of going to steep slopes, geologic hazards, none of that stuff applies to this particular proceeding. All that stuff will be discussed or decided either at the Planning Commission level or at City Commission level later on. Correct,
and that's a great segue to my next slide. So the timeline for this application, it started as HR 1609 through HR 1604, and it was a 7-unit cottage housing proposal. The Historic Review Board in May 23rd made a tentative decision to deny the proposed project. The applicant came back with a modification that revised the proposal with 6 units and some additional revised parking and some revised design details. So at the August 22nd Historic Review Board meeting, the HRB, through a fair amount of deliberations, removed another unit, which is House 2, and provided some additional design revisions, and found that, as conditioned, the proposal is compatible with the district and meets the criteria set forth in OCMC 1740 Historic Overlay Code. But there are next steps after this. So this is just the Historic Review Board compatibility review. After the applicant has received approval, he will still need to go through site plan and design review, Chapter 1762 for cottage housing, which is a permitted use in the R6 zone, basically a permitted use in all single-family zones, as well as a geologic hazard review. So these are both Type 2 reviews that can be appealed to the City Commission. But the applicant has yet to submit these and is awaiting pending this appeal. The property is located in Block 15 in the Kenema neighborhood in the Kenema National Register District. It is lots 3, 6, 7, and 8 of Block 15. You can see the overlay in the aerial. So the Cassidy House, which you'll see on the next slide, is at 502 4th. And the historic volume is kind of right here. There's a historic addition as well as a non-historic large outbuilding on the back here. For the applicant's proposed layout, as conditioned by the Historic Review Board, once again, you see the historic Cassidy House. House 1 is 600 square feet, fronts 4th Avenue. House 2 is 1,100 square feet and was removed as part of the Historic Review Board's conditions. House number 3 is 1,100 square feet. House number 4 is 800 square feet, and 5 is 800, and house 6 is 800. And these 3 homes will face Miller Street.
Show house 6 is 600 square feet.
6 is 600 square feet. Here's a side elevation. You see the Cassidy House here. This is house number 1 from 4th Avenue. And then house number 2 is this larger volume, which was removed. Once again, this is the Miller Street elevation, the Cassidy House, house number 2 removed, and these are the 3 homes that face Miller Street. Just to give an idea, those are those 3 homes there. So kind of house 3 is a little more hidden from view. So at the crux of this discussion of are these homes compatible, staff first starts with Oregon City Municipal Code 1740, exterior alterations and new construction. Section F for new construction in a historic district, we look at 7 criteria. The last one are the design guidelines adopted by the Historic Review Board. Those were adopted in 2006, and those provide additional direction. But you still have to show how you meet the criteria 1 through 6 as well. So at the crux of it, and all of the Historic Review Board's findings are attached in the record, but the Historic Review Board reviewed the proposal and determined that if the applicant was willing to comply with the conditions of approval, especially removing House 2, they felt the design was compatible with the Kenema National Register District, even though the design of the development does not strictly meet the design standards for new construction. And what I'd like to do is provide a little background in the design guidelines for new construction and alternative designs. So when the design guidelines for new construction were adopted in 2006, they were created as a safe harbor in the sense, if you follow these, we believe that you will meet those Oregon City Municipal Code criteria 1 through 6, because you'll be able to show compatibility. However, if you choose to provide an alternative design and kind of propose something outside of these design guidelines, the burden of proof goes back to you to show how you are compatible to these criteria. So I just want to read this specific finding came out of the Historic Review Board, and they quoted the whole section of alternative designs on page 3.
Can I hold you up for just a second?
Sure.
So in the last sentence of the first paragraph, it says, even though the design of the development does not meet the strict design standards, are these standards or are they guidelines? Because standards is a totally different animal from a guideline.
Well, I think that I get what you're saying, but I don't think they meant it in a legal. I don't think they meant the term standards to mean criteria. I think they meant the term standards to mean guidelines.
Okay. So the actual term that we use is guidelines.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. So I'm not going to read all of it, but I think there are 2 sentences from the Historic Review Board's decision and are embedded in page 3 of the guidelines. It says these guidelines are not mandatory standards adopted by the City Commission. In order to have any development approved, the development must be shown to comply with the adopted Historic Review Board standards found in the Historic and City Municipal Code. So once again, they're saying that while these give a safe harbor and good direction, the burden is back on the applicant to show how they meet. And so the Historic Review Board looked at the design guidelines, but they made their findings based on Oregon City Municipal Code 1740 new construction. So if you recall in your packet, there's a fair amount of conditions of approval, and if I pasted all of them, it would be about 7 slides. So I'm trying to condense it down to 1 slide. And the big picture is that the house number 2 should be removed, required additional enhanced landscaping along 4th and Miller, and that house number 1 on 4th should meet the setback standards of the zone. For all the homes, all windows and doors should be made out of wood, all double doors should be French-style doors, second-story windows should be rectangular and not exceed the door height plus 1-foot transoms, and no roof cutoffs shall be permitted. So in some of the proposed, top of the roof was, in a sense, taken out to be almost a second-story balcony approach, and that was required to be redesigned by the board.
Okay.
Each individual home has some specific requirements, these such as reorientation of the front doors, revision to exposed foundations, skylight locations, and roof materials. So if you have any questions, we can refer to any particular condition for a house. So I'm going to pass this over to Assistant City Attorney Carrie Richter.
So I've been sort of tasked with presenting this appeal and sort of the staff report. The appeal is 12 issues with a number of sub-issues, and I've grouped them together by sort of basic categories. The first sort of category of appeal issues relates to building layout issues. And the allegation is that the approval allows for excess density and lot coverage because there are 3 tax lots and 4 tax lots and 5 units. Wait,
3 and 5.
3 tax lots and 4 units.
No. There are 4 tax lots and 5 units.
Sorry about that. So there's more than one house per lot is the allegation, and more than 80% lot coverage, which goes beyond what is compatible with the district, and as a result, it's incompatible. The HRB's findings concluded that the guidelines acknowledge variation in lot sizes in Kenema. And one of the critical things I think that comes out of allowing cottage homes like this is that the houses are actually smaller. And one of the big challenges with citing new development in historic districts is that the houses are larger, modern houses, and we want more amenities than they wanted. And so this allows for smaller building footprints. The other thing that the HRB found quite compelling was that there are greater density of buildings within the Cassidy House property, which supports allowing additional density in the property that's adjacent. Another building layout issue, series of building layout issues had to do with the amount of land grading. The site is going to be graded along the 4th Avenue frontage so that house number 1 is at the street elevation instead of being elevated like the Cassidy House. So the appellant argues that the significant amount of land grading, the installation of retaining walls, the alteration of the wagon roads, and the internal parking lots make the proposal incompatible. Regarding the grading is necessary to allow accessibility to the internal part of the property. The historic district does not identify the wagon roads as an element of significance, so they are, in my view, are not protected. In any event, this proposal will not add curbs or sidewalks or alter the historic roadway. There will be a driveway on 4th Avenue that sort of connects to an existing driveway. So that's the only part of the right-of-way that will look a bit different. The retaining walls in Kenema are common because of the hilly topography in Kenema, and the internal parking lots the HRB found will not be visible from the street.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
And this is probably for Laura. If anybody else builds a new house in Oregon City, they have to build a sidewalk, right?
We do allow context-sensitive design. In most cases, the answer is yes.
Okay.
In not all cases.
All right, thanks.
The sort of second grouping of appeal issues has to do with wetland impacts. The concern is that this development adversely impacts the wetland. The HRB found, and I would agree, that the wetland impacts and the development as it relates to wetlands is going to be covered by the Geologic Hazard Overlay Review, which is not part of this. This is about historic compatibility and impacts to the historic district only. The application does request a number of reduction in setbacks. I think there's 4 reductions in setback. They're shown in the staff report, and 3 of them relate to houses 5 and 6 along the Miller Street frontage. And in order to accommodate these reduced setbacks, the Historic Review Board granted a preservation incentive to allow for reduction in the setbacks. And they found that the preservation incentives were appropriate in this case because of a natural topographic feature that the applicant has no control over, and that by reducing the setback, the spacing of these 3 homes along Miller can get further apart, and so it makes it more compatible. So that was the analysis that went into the HRB's review. And there was an additional requirement to do additional plantings to mitigate for the impacts resulting from the reduction. The third batch of issues has to do with structure design. One of the allegations that appellant raises is that there was too much duplication, that they were clones, the houses were clones. HRB found nothing in the guidelines that prohibits duplication in design. None of the proposed home designs are identical. And the idea is that when new construction is very simple, it tends to kind of evaporate into the background when you have more high-style historic structures, and so that's another reason why the HRB thought that these more simplified designs, more uniform designs made more sense. The other objection with regard to design was the use of modern design details, the skylights, the second floor balconies, and Ms. Robertson Gardner mentioned that the HRB imposed conditions limiting the size of the second story windows, prohibiting roof cutouts, and restricting skylight locations to locations not visible from the right-of-way.
What about balconies?
I don't think that there are any balconies visible from the street on the second floor, but I'll have to check on that.
Okay.
Okay, the fourth sort of group of appeal issues are that taken together, that sort of all of this deviation from the guidelines, the grading, the changes to the roads, the modern design elements, the density, work together to compromise the overall objectives for preserving Kenema. And that is one of the criteria for new construction, is that you have to further the objectives, including reduction in property values, compromising civic pride, and tourism opportunities. The HRB found that the proposed development consists of modest-sized homes designed in the vernacular style that are contextually appropriate. They also found that insufficient evidence was available to suggest that construction of these homes will have adverse effects on property values. And the HRB acknowledged that one of the objectives is to encourage the use of historic districts for housing, and that's what this does in a way that, with the modest size housing, that is in fact really compatible with the historic district. So that is what the HRB found. That's kind of a summary of the appeal issues. The commission options, I can state them again. We've stated them once before, but I'd be happy to sort of guide the commission through that once we get through the testimony. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. What do we know about the second story balcony?
It appears that no second story balconies exist on any front elevations. So I will recommend our appellant can provide additional detail on rear elevations.
Anybody have questions before we move on to the appellant?
Yep.
All right.
So we're going to have 15 minutes for the appellants, and then we'll have the applicant.
Katie, is the timer thing working on the dice? I didn't see the lights on it the last time.
Oh, it should be. Let's check it out. Oh, no, you might be right. No, it's all together. Great, see that?
So we're on, so at this point, I'm going to open the public hearing. And we will hear from, once Ms. Riggs gets the batteries changed in my timing device.
So I think we're going to hear from the appellant first.
Right.
And that will be whoever's representing the Friends of Kenema and Mr. Edgar together for 15 minutes.
Do you have another copy? Do you have another copy of that? Thank you.
So I will remind you, you have 15 minutes, and please don't try to bring up stuff that is not under the purview of the HRB.
Not my problem. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. And I'm Paul Edgar. I live in Kenema. I live in one of those 1880 houses restored. That's been in the family 130 years under continuous family ownership. This appeal that we are doing is an appeal of the Friends of Kenema, is a 501c3 with a mission to educate and protect the National Register Historic District of Kenema, and to ensure its continued viability and the protecting of the interests of all citizens. As a primary remark, the City Commission is reminded of the following. Under our municipal code, the applicant has the burden of proof to show substantial evidence in the record that the application meets the applicable approval criteria. The HRB and the City Commission must interpret our municipal code based upon the canons and the statutory construction included in the text and context of the code and relevant legislative history. Context includes other parts of municipal code, the comprehensive plan, and applicable state law and statewide planning goals. The initial matter that we think is probably most important that prevents this application from proceeding is, as we have put into our appeal, the discussion as discussed, the Cottage Home Ordinance OCMC 17.62.059 is a context by which the HRB and the Commission must interpret the historic district overlay in OCMC 1740. In addition, the staff has raised the Cottage Home Ordinance beginning on page 3 of the staff report. The Cottage Housing Ordinance flatly prohibits this proposal. Section A says, the proposed development shall remain on one lot. This is 4 lots, and the tax lots, and they have not been brought together in any way, shape, or form. This proposal simply cannot be done because it is on 3 actual lots where the buildings are. They cannot become one lot because of the existence of unvacated city alley that runs right in the middle. Furthermore, OCMC 17.62.059D16, the one lot must be at least 10,000 square feet. None of these 3 lots of this proposal is 10,000 square feet. I'd like 174060, this proposed development alters the manner in which changes the appearance of this historic district, detracting densities, parking lots which have never been allowed, designs, building lot coverage with surfaces not ever been duplicated in a National Register district that has historic places. Therefore, it is inappropriate, detracting, and not compliant. 174060, there is no way to make this proposed development to be altered in a manner that would mitigate the houses sited 10 feet apart to where it fits the totality of the Oregon City District building guidelines in its current form. 174060E, this proposal is to override 1740 historic building guidelines with Cottage Home Code. And the Planning Department has said that it does not override OCMC 1740 code in our deliberations. 174060F1, this proposal does not advance the public interest of the protection and protection, I'll get the word, of the special character of this special historic district and a National Register Historic Places status. Therefore, it is not in compliance. I'd like to skip down to the highlighted text. The Cottage Housing Ordinance is context for interpretation, particularly since cottage housing is permitted use within both R5 and R6 zones. Part of the historic architecture and cultural heritage of this site is that it is part of the historic Kenema plat, which has traditional lot size associated with the plat and upon which the surrounding homes have always been constructed. The Cottage Home Ordinance is a context for this provision. It flatly prohibits this proposal, Section A says, the proposed development shall remain on one lot. This proposal cannot be done because it is on 3 lots. They cannot become one lot of existence and with an unvacated city alley. Furthermore, under OCMC 1762-059D16, the one lot must at least be 10,000 square feet. None of the 3 lots of the proposed development are 10,000 square feet. These are the types of new designs of which has been vernacular and historic. There is no basic design like this around, and we have already spelled out that there is in the code, and that there shouldn't be detracting clones. The staff report refers to modern vernacular, which is frankly an oxymoron statement. In addition, OCMC 1762-050 A3A is a context for interpretation of this provision. The proposed cottage housing is in the Kenema National Register and abuts a listed historic Cassidy house. Staff quotes the statements of the significance of the house, but the documents from which it comes does not appear to be in the record. That is included in what I've given you. OCMC 2.28.070D states, notwithstanding OCMC 1750, during the commission appeal from the HRB, the commission shall consider the record and such evidence as may be offered. We offer the full historic inventory form for the Cassidy house, which states that it is a Queen Anne style house. Therefore, the cottage house homes would not have been traditional Queen Anne, but some non-existent modern style. This proposed development will destabilize property values in Kenema and affect Oregon City. This proposed development does not engender or foster civic pride. This proposed development will lessen and detract tourism and the visitors coming into Oregon City looking to see historic representations of what and why Kenema has a National Register Historic District status with National Historic Places status. This weakens the city's first city historic story and importance in the result of negative effects of the economic aspects in all investments to promote our history. This proposed planned development detracts from telling the story and the role Kenema played in the history and the development of the Oregon Territory by altering it in a gross way, the topology, impacting the wetlands. It proposes to bypass all reasonable vegetated corridor setback requirements that are part of the history spelled out in the National Register Historic District nomination document. I just want to, these setbacks, the fact that the setbacks are a standard, not a building guideline. They are standards in our code, and we're saying, forget them. And that's, to me, is crazy. Packing 3 houses with 2 clone houses alters the understanding of Goal 5.3 of encouraging the preservation of the National Register Historic District. Policy Goal 531, the plan developed is not compatible with the historic character of the Kenema Historic District. The size of the homes with minimum setbacks, one too close to the other, if they're 10 feet apart. We've never had that. That's unacceptable. It detracts. I want to shortcut through this and just, you guys can read it, but to look at you and say, we have an obligation, those of us that care about historic preservation, I sit on the Clackamas County Historic Review Board, as an example. I care. I didn't put $250,000 into my house to try to make it look right, do right, put in all wood windows, and walk the extra mile to not promote what is right in historic preservation, what is right to protect the image of Kenema. One of our leaders in this community was talking to me, and I was getting advice. And the statement was made to me, Kenema's dying the death of 1,000 cuts. What does that mean? That means piece by piece, we're degrading it through actions like this. We're tearing it down. And somewhere along the line, I don't like to be the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dike, but I feel like that. And I just tell you that you guys have an obligation. I hope you understand how important I feel about it personally, and the desire for us to work together. I want to see development on this property. Doesn't bother me, but it has to be the right development. And I hope you guys agree too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edgar. Thank you. Chris Staggs, the applicant.
My name is Chris Staggs. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I own the property that we're discussing tonight.
Hold on a second. Did I mess this
just
up?
a sec. No, just a second.
Yeah, you're on.
Well, I just wanted to make sure I'm on the.
15 minutes. This doesn't reflect the situation where we have an appeal, where we have an appellant.
Oh, okay.
That's not the applicant. So
All right, okay.
We've added another column above applicant where we put appellant.
Okay.
So you didn't
Sorry, I
mess
just
it up.
wasn't sure.
Our sheet doesn't match what we're doing.
Okay.
Before I get started, I'd like to just say that I know that the city is evolving and changing and growing. And when I first visited Oregon City a few years ago, I felt when I saw Oregon City that there is amazing potential here. And that's why we decided we wanted to do something in Oregon City. And our eventual goal is to build our own house in Oregon City, in Kenema. So we are not a big developer. We're a family-owned small business that is really focused on creating places and creating special places where people can live and enjoy living. And we're coming at it from that perspective. So I want to just say that. And earlier, in the earlier presentation from the Coragio group, where they talked about some really interesting, oh, I can't say anything about that? Okay, sorry.
Keep it on the record, please.
Anyway, so those are things that are important to us too. And the economic improvement, contrary to the appellant's statement that we're tearing down, I think we're actually building up and we're improving and we're making Kenema a better place to live. And that's really our focus and interest. So in my presentation, my goal is to walk us through, address some of the appeal language, and demonstrate why we believe the HRB got it right in this decision to approve our project with the conditions of approval conditions. We started this process nearly a year ago with the HRB. We have gone through the very rigorous and exhaustive process with the HRB, which has taken us over the past 12 months. We have engaged with the Kenema Neighborhood Association formally on several occasions and informally. We've met with neighbors, talked to neighbors, and I think it's important to note that the Kenema Neighborhood Association supports our development, supports what we're doing. And that is the evidence of that is there was no appeal by the Kenema Neighborhood Association. And there were many people in those meetings that were There were obviously a lot of questions and a lot of discussion because this has never been done before in Oregon City, let alone in Kenema in a historic district. But I found that the process with the neighborhood was very productive. I found the process with the HRB was very productive. And we have been through a very kind of deliberate and exhaustive process working with the community. Could you go to the next slide, please?
Oh, I didn't know there was a presentation up there.
Or did I?
So every drawing and every illustration that I'm going to show in the presentation comes directly out of our application and out of our submittals that we have given to the HRB to date. This is on, and I'm hoping I've got all these numbers right, but I think it's page 10 in our historic analysis, neighborhood analysis. We did an exhaustive study of Kenema. We looked at nearly every home, studied every home, looked at the proportions and the scale and the materiality, the conditions of the home and how it was on the property line or not on the property line, how it was situated in the hillside. You know, we looked at the period of significance from 1850 to 1925. We understand the historic district in a very exhaustive and detailed way. Because we have an architecture background, we understand some of the issues and questions around scale and proportion and materiality and the historic qualities of the Kenema district. We presented our studies to the Kenema Neighborhood Association, as I said earlier, and it was all brought together in what we call the Kenema Neighborhood Analysis Package that we submitted to the HRB. We spent many hours surveying, photographing, measuring, and understanding the neighborhood, and discussing the project with city staff and with neighbors. So I believe at the end of that process, we have a very complete and thorough knowledge of kind of what is happening in Kenema, what it's all about, the character and what's important to Kenema and the people of Kenema. And I think it's important to note that the majority of the people there who we have met in public and know have been involved in the process support the development, support the project. Yeah. So this is a slide which represents one of our analysis maps of Kenema, outlining or showing the historic homes that are built on or over the property line, non-historic homes that are built on or over the property line, and the total homes in the district. And you can see that Kenema is a dense sort of developed area, situated in basically a collection of hillside conditions. So it has this kind of challenging situation where over the past and throughout history, the homes were situated in ways to work with the existing topography and to work with each other. So there's a kind of design language or a place language of Kenema. And contrary to what the appellant has said, there's actually many situations in Kenema where you have very dense and close homes next to each other on the property line or within 10 feet of each other or even closer than 10 feet to each other. So this illustration and these photographs and maps are showing those conditions. For example, the home at 605 3rd Avenue on the top, the top image there shows the parking out in the right-of-way, the house being very close to the property line, if not on the property line. The second set of images below that is the Cassidy house right next door to us, which is, in terms of volume and building density, is one of the most dense properties in Kenema.
Excuse me,
as you can see from.
Are all these photos in the record?
Yes.
And all of the maps on the left-hand side are in the record as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Every drawing in this presentation came right out of the record. So I think what's important to note with this slide is that there's this kind of Kenema historic context. And what I'd like to do also is I'd like to read an excerpt from the new construction design guidelines.
Sir, you're more than halfway through your time. Just
for Oregon City. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. On page 25, the first paragraph on the left-hand side, there's a note here that says, as a result, some home lacks setbacks with front porches opening almost directly onto the street. And this is out of the Kenema Kenema National Register Historic District historic statement. So my point is that there's a character in Kenema, there's a historic character that's recognized in Kenema that really says that the proposal that we have put forward, the application to build these cottage homes, is very much in keeping with the historic character of Kenema. In terms of relative density of development, the setbacks that are not established as a pattern in Kenema, and then the variety of density in the Kenema area. Not to mention the existing overlapping property lines and right-of-way throughout Kenema. Next slide, please. The next slide is just want to emphasize how the project fits in with the neighborhood and relates to the general compatibility. That's really the central question, is this development compatible with Kenema? And we agree with the Historic Review Board that it is. And through the process that we went through that is aligned with the Oregon City code for following the process and how you come to decision making on a project like this. Next slide, please. This slide is a site plan of the property, just showing our proposed Kenema, our proposed cottage site plan and layout of the site. Please note that house number 2, as a part of the condition of approval, is to be removed as a part of the conditions of approval. And what I'd like to say at this time is, again, emphasizing that the project preserves open space and wetland on the property. The homes are situated around that open space, which is a goal for the city, is to preserve open space in the Kenema area and in Oregon City in general. So we have composed the homes in a way that does that, and the wetland has been delineated and has been registered with the state, with the Department of State Lands. It is not on the city maps in terms of recognized wetland, but we are recognizing it as a wetland, as open space on the property. And because of that, as was mentioned earlier, we asked for a preservation incentive for the 2 homes, house number 5 and 6, right here on the property line. And this is kind of a unique situation in that the street is out here the asphalt edge is actually out here. So there's a significant distance from the street edge to the actual home. So unlike some of the other homes in Kenema that are right on the street, we are actually 20 to 30 feet away from the asphalt. So it allows us to have a very significant landscape buffer between the home and the road. Next slide, please. I can probably do it here, right? Yeah. Sorry, I forgot that. Okay. So the next slide is really about the proportion and scale of the home. So on the left is one of our proposed cottages facing Miller Street, and then a historic home in Kenema, an existing historic home in Kenema. And you can see that we have paid a lot of attention to proportions of windows, the siding and scale of the home, And we believe, and as the HRB decision has shown, that we are very much compatible with the existing architecture and language of Kenema. The next slide is just reiterating how we are kind of deferring to the historic Cassidy House adjacent to our property. So in the drawing, this is the Cassidy House, the original Cassidy House here, and then our proposed cottage is lower in sort of respect and deferring to the Cassidy House, and it's also oriented in the same way towards the street as the Cassidy House. So again, we are being kind of respectful of the historic context and the historic character of the Kenema neighborhood by arranging the home in a similar way, by being lower in elevation, it's deferring to the Cassidy House in a respectful way. And it's important to note just that there are similarities in all of our cottage homes in the volume and form. So when you look at one of these new cottages, it's going to feel like one of the original homes in the Kenema neighborhood. Finally, on the last, Harold, this is a slide showing 3 elevations, and these are, it's important to note that the cutouts in the roof will be deleted as a part of the conditions of approval, shown here in the end elevation and here in the side. And then also in the end elevation of 2 of the cottages, we are taking out the triangular glass and making the glass smaller as a condition of approval. And then finally, just in the last seconds of my time, I just want to say that we believe the Kenema neighborhood will benefit from the addition of these modestly scaled residences. And we're asking the City Commission to recognize that the applicant and the HRB process was done in an appropriate way. And we're asking you to uphold the notice of decision, which we believe correctly followed the guidelines and standards for historic development, and heard the arguments and debate and made the appropriate conditions of approval for the development.
Thank you. We're going to take 10 minutes. Thanks, Chris. We'll be back in 10.
Back on. Here. Come on.
Okay, we will reconvene. I have two speakers, actually a couple more than,
No, just two.
did we drop off a couple?
Yeah, we dropped one off.
Okay, so Howard Post and Karen Blaha.
Good evening, I'm Howard Post, live 302 Blanchard, Oregon City. A couple things that pass on to this. They talked about the lot. Generally, the lots in Kanema are 50 by 100. And that's a standard lot. They touched on the lots where these lots aren't together, so they're not valid. How they're going to work that out, I don't know. The second thing is, it's my understanding that this is going to be a commercial development, and the private properties are for rent, not for sale.
That has nothing to do with what's
It has
going
to do
on.
with compatibility. Anyway, the statement, there's no commercial developments above Third Avenue in your bylaw. This is a vast thing. Generally, the lots are 50 by 100, and houses are built on that, and some of the lots are a little bigger, or they get incentives, but the standard lots are 50 by 100. It is not common for Kanema to grant preservation to single-family homes because it benefits nothing. Most of them push them out. They're bigger houses now. They're building bigger houses in Kanema, and they push the lines to the thing. They used to be little old houses like 600 or 800 square feet. Now they're bigger houses, and that's fine. Kanema's upgrading. Things are coming. Most of the people in Kanema aren't against development, but they just try to make it compatible with the rest of Kanema. We're going to lose out on this. Perhaps we'll lose our historic district and landmark status because this is changing the district. This has never been done before. Most of the houses are 50 by 100, and this is a vast determining, and this is going to set a precedence in a historic district, because it's my understanding, once they do this, then there might be more. So that's something to consider out. This is changing the property, changing the whole Kanema district. There was talk about the Kanema Neighborhood Association being in agreement. Nobody come to spoke. Kanema doesn't have a land share, so nobody comes to speak on their behalf. A lot of the people are for this, a lot of people are against this. But the overall picture, or you guys is going to do, is are we going to change Kanema from a historic district to just be a cluster of houses with no guidelines? I think that's all I have to say.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Howard.
Karen Blaha.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. You have my written comments, and I stand behind them. I, in addition, would like to say that I support the staff recommendations and agree with them. And I think it's time for the project to move on to the next steps in the city's processes, and those steps alone are daunting. And with that, I conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Karen?
Yes.
How close do you live to the project?
I live next door, adjacent. My property and home in which I live is adjacent to the subject property.
Okay.
And
Thank
can I ask you one more
Sure.
question?
Sure.
Are you active in the Kanema Neighborhood Association?
I am. I am the treasurer of the Kanema Neighborhood Association.
Did the
And it is-
applicant come and present to you guys?
He has come to the meetings and talked about the project more than once. The association has not taken a formal position on the project.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
Can I have an opportunity to speak as an individual?
1 second. No.
No, you are the appellant.
You are the appellant. You got your time. You don't get this chance, you don't get another bite at the apple just to try to come back as an individual and speak. So we've had everything else. The applicant gets
to rebut because they bear the burden of proof.
So if you have anything else to say, come on up.
Yes. I'm joined by Kristen Miner, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Is this on? Good evening, mayors and commissioner. My name is Kristen Miner. I'm from Portland, and I'm here with Chris Staggs. In Portland, I sit on the Landmarks Commission, and it's also my job. I work in a small architecture office where we do historic preservation. So Chris asked me to come in and look at the case record so far, look at his proposal, and to basically assess and analyze his development and how it stands with the nature of the historic district. So one comment I would like to make regarding the proposed design is that the appellant has said that there is no such thing as a contemporary or a modern style of vernacular, and that's really not true. What Chris has designed, I would say, is a contemporary vernacular style, and it takes its cues from the historic contributing structures in Kanaima. And it doesn't necessarily replicate those existing houses, but it takes the majority of its design cues from those, and those include the really major things that you notice about a development, such as the scale, the footprint, and the materiality.
And I just want to make some final remarks, hit a couple of points, and that is we believe that the process with the Historic Review Board and with the community was, again, exhaustive and detailed in a way that we came away from that process having a very clear understanding of what it means to build a new home in Kanaima. And it was challenging in the sense that we have the underlying zoning, the R6 zoning, we have the cottage home development, and then we also have the historic code. So those three codes are all overlapping and all kind of speaking to each other in this project. And I'd like to point out that you could build 4 single-family homes with ADUs on these 4 lots of record. You could build 8 cottages based on the cottage home zoning code. We originally applied for 7 to do 7 cottages because we said, you know what, we think that the density would be more appropriate if we did 7 rather than 8, even though we knew that we could do 8. And then through the process with the Historic Review Board, we eventually ended up where we are now with 5 cottages. And I think that that is a very appropriate scale and density for Kanaima when you look at the Kanaima context and the density of the Kanaima neighborhood. So we believe that we have gone through the appropriate process and certainly met the compatibility standards under the design guidelines with the city. And we agree with the HRB that we have designed a very compatible project for Kanaima. And we'd like to request that the City Commission tonight uphold the notice of decision to approve the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
It wasn't clear to me whether each of the 5 cottages are on an individual tax lot or like one combined tax lot, or do they have individual tax lots for each house?
There are 4 tax lots, and there are 5 cottages. So the cottages are seen as a multifamily development, and they will all be on those 4 tax lots will be combined into one lot that that the development will sit on.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I have a follow-up to that question, but I need to direct it to Ms. Richter. Each party cites the cottage housing ordinance in support of their position. One cites Section A and D, and the city cites Section C. I realize they're probably just excerpts. Are they in conflict with each other, or if
I don't believe they are in conflict with each other. The appellant's argument is that these 5 houses cannot go on more than one lot under the cottage home section. And what the applicant's saying is that when they get there, when they get to that phase, they're going to consolidate all this, so it will be one lot. It will be one lot that's over 10,000 square feet. It'll be 20,000 square feet. So that is how they are going to get there. But for purposes of this review, the OCMC 1762 cottage standards aren't relevant.
okay, that's what I need to know.
That we're going to cross that bridge, and the
Somewhere down the line.
National Resource Overlay District and all of that jazz.
That actually should have been my first question. Is that part of the HRB role? And you just told me it's
HRB's
not.
role is to evaluate the historic
understood.
appropriateness for the
Okay,
district.
thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Thanks. I will now close the public hearing. And what's next, Ms. Richter?
I want to just make a couple of final comments with regard to a couple of issues that the appellant raised, and then I'll set forth the options, and you all can decide how you wish to proceed. First of all, one of the testifiers talked about whether or not the property would be rented or leased. That's not germane to the HRB's review. It's really not germane to the land use process. Let's talk about elimination of the guidelines. I think what Miss Christina was Miss Robinson Gardner, Christine, whatever order her names come in. I just call her CRG because it's easier. So then when I have to actually say her name, it's harder. Excuse me, I apologize. One of the things she pointed out was that there are the guidelines. If you comply with all the guidelines, you comply with the criteria. And in this case, there was a little deviation from the guidelines with regard to some of the grading and with regard to some of the design elements. But HRB found at the end of the day the criteria were satisfied. The objectives of the purpose for the purpose of the district were satisfied. So the complaint that we're not exactly following the guidelines is something that the HRB agreed with. And that kind of variety and creativity in historic districts with regard to design is encouraged. If not encouraged, certainly allowed. So those are the kind of points I wanted to raise. The appellant also raised this idea of submitting some new materials into the record, citing a Chapter 2 of the Oregon City Municipal Code that relates to participation in the Historic Review Board. There is a phrase in here that talks about the commission may accept additional evidence, but given the city's commission's precedent for not allowing additional evidence in appeal hearings and the numerous places in 1750 where it talks about appeals from the Historic Review Board being on the record, my recommendation would be that you reject this additional testimony. I will point out, though, that the staff report that was presented to the Historic Review Board does have a full description of the Cassidy House and its significance that is in the record, so I'm not sure that rejecting this has much relevance in terms of the substance. But I think my recommendation is that you all, if you're ready to make a decision, make a tentative decision tonight, and then we will return with findings on December 6th, consistent with the additional materials we've received tonight and some additional analysis. Oh, and the applicant has agreed to extend the 120-day to accommodate that until December 7th. So the options are to agree with the Historic Review Board decision and reject the appeal and approve the application, including the conditions of approval that the HRB identified. Deny the appeal and approve the application with different conditions of approval, or grant the appeal and deny the application. In any case, we will come back with findings consistent with your deliberation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Ms. Robinson Gardner would be happy to answer any questions.
Just CRG, that's fine. Yeah.
I know you all hate
Mr. Mayerberg?
Regarding the grading, if it were the individual 4 lots that they are, or 6 lots that they are now, would they be allowed to grade each lot individually if there were a house on it today?
Yes, if the applicant came in with 5 Historic Review Board applications.
Is your mic on?
Yeah, I'll answer the question with a scenario. If the applicant came in with 5 or 4 Historic Review Board applications for 4 single-family homes, we would look at them all individually and analyze the best access for each individual application. So I can't, it would depend on each lot and how that new house is proposed and access, but there could potentially be could potentially be grading in relation to all the different lots and how you're going to gain access for it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Shaw?
Okay, so I sat on the Historic Review Board for 10 years as one of the founding members. And I'm going to, that I'm just saying that. I'm not saying that that would make me go right to a Historic Review Board decision, but I want to kind of qualify that a little bit. So, because that means I'm pretty sensitive to what happens in Kenema, what happens in McLaughlin as these historic neighborhoods. That I'm a building designer. I have been in the area for 30 years doing remodels and additions on historic homes. So this project here is actually pretty exciting as far as the architecture is concerned. As these folks know up here, I'm kind of a proponent of densifying wherever I can, because the last thing I want to do is move a urban growth boundary out. So anytime I can see some infill with some density, I think that's a good thing. And this just happens to be in a historic neighborhood. And I think the applicant here has done a great job as far as providing compatible and complementary structures in here with what's there already. There's a variety of architecture down in that area. So I don't know how you get to a vernacular architecture down there. So
vernacular is like sustainable. It doesn't really mean anything.
So the what we're looking at here tonight, I mean, there were 10 or 11 issues that were brought up against the project here, and it looks like they were all satisfied. They all complied as proposed. Either that, or they complied with conditions, or they weren't applicable. And I think that's all I got. The only thing I was asking about is parking. So it looked like there was 9 parking spots there.
It was 8.
8?
I think I saw 8.
And that meets the criteria for what we're doing here?
I'm going to answer the blanket question, which is the applicant has reviewed the cottage housing proposal, and the burden is on him to go through the process to show that he can meet it. So the parking requirements and with regard to cottage housing was not part of the Historic Review Board's deliberation.
Okay.
You got it, Commissioner O'Donnell?
I think Commissioner Shaw summarized it well. I think it's important to note that this is a very limited finding, and I'm ready to proceed when anyone else is.
Anything additional, Commissioner Mengelberg?
I have one more question, Mayor. Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Smith.
Oh,
Be nice.
anyway, can a historic district ever lose their historic status? I don't know if I've ever heard that before, but
Do you want to answer that? The answer to that question is yes, it can. Yes, it can. I'm going to leave it at that because to get into it would introduce some new evidence, and I'm not going to do that. But
All
the
right.
answer is yes, it can.
okay.
Okay, so everybody's had their shot. I just have a couple things to say, and that is that, you know, Oregon City was established in 1844, and we have history that goes all the way back to that. So, you know, we have stuff that we did in the 40s and in the 50s, and now we're, you know, in the 21st century. And so history isn't a snapshot in time, it's a continuum. And the stuff I saw today looks very much like the stuff that you see when you drive through Kenema or parts of McLaughlin, especially the sections that are in McLaughlin that are would be south of 5th Street. Back in the day when those were lower income kinds of houses. So I'm not buying off on the whole, you know, it's going to ruin the historic district of Kenema. It looks like the folks have done an excellent job with the architecture and the siting and are more than willing to be compatible with the things that we want to do. I think the Historic Review Board did yeoman's work in getting to this decision in the first place. And as we are often say, we're loath to overturn one of our advisory boards, especially either the Planning Commission or Historic Review, because we have to respect the volunteer time that those folks put in and the hard work that they do to get there. The other part of this that as we struggle, and we struggle not only region-wide but nationally with housing affordability, it seems to me that building places that are 600, 800, and 1,000 square feet goes much more to the affordability question than you know, building single-family homes on individual lots and I think that's the reason we created the cottage cluster zoning or you know, stuff in the code. So I didn't see anything in the appeal that would lead me to overturn the Historic Review Board's decision. With that, I'll entertain a motion.
Okay, move to approve Historic Review Board's August 22nd. Tentatively, August 20, let's start. Appeal the Historic Review Board's August 22, 2017 decision with conditions.
And deny the appeal?
And deny the appeal, yes.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Shaw, seconded by Commissioner Mengelberg. Do you have anything else you need to say, Ms. Richter? Further discussion? Call the roll.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Mengelberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
I'm saying aye, and I appreciate the Historic Review Board's work on this.
Mayor Holliday?
Aye.
The motion passes.
So we will return on December 6th with findings, and there will be no testimony at that hearing. We will just review the findings to confirm that they are consistent with the board's, or the commission's deliberation and adopt them at that meeting.
Okay. So moving on to PC 17-140, Parker Knoll subdivision, TP 17-0211 lot subdivision at Leland Road and Redaway Avenue, including utilization of an existing easement.
Hang on, she's getting ready over here.
Oh, go ahead.
West Leland Park. Did you need something, Ms. Richter?
No, I just was not ready.
Well, catch up.
I'm on it. All right.
So this, is this a public hearing?
No.
then it's in the wrong spot because we're under public hearings. Well, let's just dispose of this. This is just the approval of the findings, right?
It's a public hearing in the fact that it is part of the completion of a land use process. And you all made a tentative decision, and we have findings before you, so it is a public hearing in that I have to ask, does any commissioner have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare since the last hearing, before we move on to the findings?
No.
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 Does anyone in the audience wish to question the commissioner about these disclosures? Seeing none. You have some findings before you.
Do we have, hold on a second. Do we have anybody asked to testify? Then I'm going to open and close the public hearing. Now you can go.
Excuse me. Thank you very much. So on October 18th, the City Commission tentatively voted 4-1 to approve the proposed subdivision, finding that the criteria are met with the proposed conditions of approval and that the applicant or that the proposal did not require a vote of the people. With that, we're just asking that you review the tentative findings and move for a final decision on that.
Move to adopt the findings.
Your motion?
I move to approve item 6B, PC 17-140, Park and Roll subdivision, TP 17-02, 11 lot subdivision at Leland Road and Redaway Avenue, including utilization of an existing easement in West Leyland Park.
And adopting the findings.
And adopting the findings.
Second.
Is there any additional discussion? Call the roll, please.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Well, I'm nothing but consistent. I'll say no.
Commissioner Mengelberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
Mayor Holliday?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Okay, now on to PC 17-139, Land Use Board of Appeals, remand of the historic nomination for the community cannery and workshop annex in the upper yard of the city's Public Works Operations Center. Ms. Turway.
Thank you very much. Assistant City Attorney Carrie Richter will provide their disclosures as well as a staff report.
Public hearing on this land use matter is scheduled for tonight. A staff report has been prepared and made available to the public 7 days before tonight's hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to the proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria and made it available to the public. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the chart. This is the initial hearing for this subdivision and charter interpretation request. Excuse me. I'm sorry. This isn't an initial hearing. This is the remand hearing for the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association versus City of Oregon City case. The standard procedures that usually apply don't necessarily apply to a remand hearing, but we're going to hold a public hearing. We are going to take testimony from anyone who wishes to testify. We are not going to consider new evidence, and we are going to limit the issues to the 4 issues identified in the notice of this proceeding. Anyone who wishes to speak on this matter should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the city recorder. Speakers will proceed in the order in which their card is received. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and whether you reside or have a business within the city. All argument should be directed to the 4 issues identified in the hearing notice. A person may submit written material while the public record is open. So long as it does not contain new evidence. Any written materials presented to staff will be placed before the City Commission. If the city commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you wish to appeal must have been raised for the commission's consideration without raising the issue on the record with sufficient specificity and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond. The issue will not be judged appealable to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, Oregon City Revised Statute 197-796 requires us to announce the following: the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. At this point, I'm going to ask if any commissioner has any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare.
No.
No.
Has any commissioner visited the site?
Yes.
Yes.
Does anybody in the audience wish to question the commissioners? Seeing none, we will move forward with the staff report. All right, so as you may recall, the background about this case is this case relates to the Camp Adair buildings that are located in the Public Works Operations site. The two buildings are identified as the Community Cannery and the Workshop Annex. Multnomah Neighborhood Association filed an application asking the Historic Review Board to designate these two buildings as historic. Before the HRB held a hearing on that request, the city manager issued a letter to the Historic Review Board and the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association revoking consent to the designation of these buildings as historic. There's a state law 197-772 that says that, we'll talk about it a little further, but it says that a party can revoke consent to a designation, and at that point, no further action happened.
A property owner.
Property owner. This is a property owner.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it. Oh, I have a slide. So I just told you all this stuff. The application to designate the structures took place. The city refused consent. The Historic Review Board briefed and took no action on the applications because they had received the city manager's revocation. The matter was appealed to LUBA. There were two LUBA appeals. One was with regard to the letter revoking consent, and the second appeal was with regard to the HRB's failure to take action on the application. LUBA remanded the decision with regard to the HRB's failure to take action. There were a couple of preliminary issues about whether or not what the relationship was between the city code and the state law, and whether or not the city manager had authority to revoke consent. So the questions before the board that are up for consideration is to confirm that the city commission is the proper decision maker on this remand. The LUBA decision talks about the city commission or the Historic Review Board making that decision. The staff report explains that it's our recommendation that the city commission is the proper decision maker because they are the ultimate arbiter of the meaning of the code. Second issue that is before the commission for consideration is whether the adoption of OCMC 1740-50, which are the provisions providing for the designation of historic resources, serve to waive application of the state Oregon consent law with regard to publicly owned property. Number 3 is whether the city manager had authority to revoke consent. As a practical matter, you are going to decide as part of this proceeding whether or not you wish to revoke consent at this point. So this kind of moots item 3, but it might be helpful in our findings to have some guidance on the city manager's authority. And item 4 is sort of the crux of what M&A argued before LUBA, but LUBA did not reach the question of whether or not the state Oregon consent law distinguishes between private and public property owners in the ability to refuse consent. I just explained why the city commission is the proper decision maker. Ultimately, any recommendation by the HRB would be forwarded to the city commission. and ultimately the City Commission adopted 1740-050. The adoption of these provisions did not waive the city's right to object to historic designation because, first of all, a local government cannot waive a guarantee provided by state law except for by its own volition. So it would be a voluntary decision by the City of Oregon City to affirmatively waive its ability to revoke consent. And there's no indication in 1740 that suggests that the city intended to waive its ability to object under the Oregon consent law. And in fact, OCMC 1740-50 was amended after the Oregon consent law was in place, and oftentimes when a governing body amends a provision after a state law is in place and they don't mention it, that would suggest they were aware of it and decided not to exclude themselves from the purview or the guarantee provided by state law. The argument could be that it was implicitly waived. Again, you can't to suggest that there's some kind of implicit waiver would it suggest that the implicit waiver ran to private property owners too, and the city certainly could not remove private property owners' ability to object to a designation, and so it doesn't work to abridge that guarantee. The city manager had authority to revoke consent. The chapter 5, section 21C outlines all of the duties bestowed upon the city manager. They include the general supervision over all city property. It was this authority that the city attorney's office relied on in supporting Mr. Conkle in revoking consent. And it is our belief that that was the authority. Item 4, the statute does not distinguish between private and public property owners. I've quoted the relevant portion of ORS 197772. It says, a local government shall allow a property owner to refuse consent to any form of historic property designation at any point during the designation process. The argument that MNA has presented is that the fact that the statute uses different terms to say a local government and a property owner suggests that those are mutually exclusive and that a local government can never be a property owner. The reference to local government in the statute is as the body reviewing the local historic designation, and the reference to the property owner is the person or entity that owns the property. In the Supreme Court decision, Lake Oswego Preservation Society versus City of Lake Oswego, the Supreme Court expressly looked at the definition of property owner and defined it as a person or entity. And there are a number of cases that talk about a city acting in both a regulatory capacity and a proprietary capacity. It does it all the time. A local government is given all the power to dispose of property in the same way as a private entity unless otherwise prohibited by law or local regulation. Sorry to keep you up. So those are the 4 issues before. I can restate them, but I think I've set them out pretty clearly. At this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, or we will take testimony from folks in the audience with the caveat that we are limited to these 4 issues, and we are and the materials that are in the record, which would include the LUBA record that is on remand.
Okay. Questions? All right, then I'm going to open the public hearing. Mr. Buss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Jesse Buss. I have a local law practice here in Oregon City. I'm here representing the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association.
Hang on, 5 minutes.
Oh, wait, I think they're discussing that. Is he considered the applicant?
No,
or is
he's
he
considered a
the neighbor?
representative of the Neighborhood Association.
Well, I think the Neighborhood Association was listed as the applicant for this land use hearing. I think we're entitled to 15 minutes. I won't use the whole time.
Well, one, this isn't a hearing. This is
a remand hearing, so
remand hearing.
we're off, we're sort of off the chart now.
Right, so, but there is no real application on the table here. This is Luba coming back and
This is
saying,
a
we
remand-
need you to answer these questions for us.
Correct. That is correct.
So 5 minutes.
All right, Mr. Mayor, well, we'll object to that and request 15 minutes, but I'll try and stick to 5. So after I make my comments here, I'll submit some written comments into the record as well as a DVD. So I'll just go through some bullet points here and point out where the Neighborhood Association disagrees with Ms. Richter. First of all, I think this can be pretty easily corrected, but in the agenda, the Luba record that was attached was the first version of the record. There were 2 then amendments. The second amended record should be included in the record, not the first one that's dated May 15th, 2017. As to the Lake Oswego Preservation Society case from 2016, in addition to the discussion that Ms. Richter talked about, the Oregon Supreme Court specifically said that this statute that you're interpreting, partially here tonight, should be narrowly construed. And it talked about the history of that statute and the fact that it arose out of Yamhill County. And there were a few remands back and forth to the Court of Appeals there, but that Yamhill County case involved private property owners who were upset at the local governments telling them how to use their property. And this was in the context of historic designation. So there was an ordinance that went up saying that private property owners can object to these impositions. That was ultimately rejected by the Court of Appeals. And the statute, 197772, came to take its place at the state level, but it was modeled off of that same ordinance, which, again, specifically arose out of private property concerns. In the Lake Oswego Preservation Society case, the court interpreted the term property owner narrowly in a different context, but it should still be interpreted narrowly. And considering the actual legislative history and where this law came from, the term property owner and the term local government really are mutually exclusive, especially where you have a local government, such as Oregon City, who's subject to statewide land use planning goal 5, historic preservation. That's the distinction between private property and public property. Certainly, the local government could not waive a private property owner's right to revoke consent, but it's an entirely different story when it comes to public property. The M&A also objects to new evidence not being allowed tonight. We're kind of a strange procedural posture. This application from the M&A never actually made it to a hearing before the HRB. It went up to Luba. Luba remanded and said the HRB needs to consider this, but there has never been an actual open record here. So the record needs to be opened at some point, and that should happen now. For the same reason, the association requests a continuance of this hearing so that the record can be opened and new evidence placed in it. Which brings me to my next point. Luba specifically said the Historic Review Board needed to address this issue. Coming directly to the Oregon City Commission is bypassing our our ordinances that say the Historic Review Board has the first bite at the apple for all historic review issues. Now, it may come up on appeal after that, but they have to be the first decision maker. Further, the criteria on the actual application for landmark designation are set forth explicitly and thoroughly in the Oregon City Municipal Code, Chapter 17.40, 050. And it does not say that the city, either the HRB or the city manager or the city commission, can just discretionarily refuse consent. There are specific criteria that apply. Further, the notice that I received on behalf of the Neighborhood Association didn't identify this issue on the screen number 1, that the City Commission is the proper decision maker on this remanded matter, nor did the notice that I received for the Neighborhood Association talk about the City Commission tonight revoking consent for this application. That would need to be renoticed unless the notice went out and I didn't receive it, to show that the public actually has an opportunity to come and comment and present testimony about why the city itself, through the commission, should not revoke this consent. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
I have one question for you, Mr. Buss.
Sure.
So are you saying that the city of Oregon City doesn't own this property right here?
Of course, I'm not saying that, no. I don't see where you're going.
What is the difference between a property owner is a property owner is a property owner, right?
Well, the neighborhood association disagrees with that characterization in this context.
So the sky isn't blue either. I'm confused. It makes zero sense to me that we can make decisions about selling pieces of property, buying pieces of property as a city commission. And as a city commission and the city manager, do they not have the right to say how we're going to use that property?
When the city, as here, has adopted a comprehensive historic review code that governs those decisions, the answer is no.
Well, I respectfully disagree. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Ms. Richter, can you...
Is there anybody else to testify? Then I'm going to close the public hearing.
Okay.
And now you have a question?
Carrie Richter.
Yes, I was wondering if Ms. Richter can address some of those issues, I guess.
Thank you. Sure. The point about the second amended record is a concern that I'm going to have to look into. For that reason, I'm going to recommend that you all make a tentative decision, and I'll return with the corrected record if that's really a problem. With regard to new evidence and open record and continuance materials, again, we are in a remand proceeding, so we are not in a quasi-judicial hearing procedure that started from the beginning. We are in a remand proceeding where LUBA asked us to answer sort of three questions. And those three questions have nothing to do with the OC 1740-50 designation criteria that are assigned to the Historic Review Board for initial evaluation. The only question before the commission tonight has to do with jurisdictional questions relating to ORS 197772 that are state law related questions and has to do with our local code only with regard to whether or not we waived a state right. The city waived a state right. So for that reason, I would not recommend that the city commission open the record. I would not recommend that you grant a continuance. I mean, my recommendation is a tentative decision again, and then we return with findings. But you certainly can grant the continuance if you wish. I dealt with the Historic Review Board as the first decision maker. The notice provided identified three questions. I think the fourth question here is implicit in the third question, which is whether ORS 197772 allows public entities to refuse to consent to a historic designation. So I think that is, by making this decision, you're going to revoke consent. The question of HRB City Commission is the proper decision maker in this remanded matter, I think is something that is for the City Commission's interpretation and didn't require additional testimony with regard to that.
Well, because the HRB couldn't make those decisions as the HRB because these aren't questions about historic
designation.
Stuff. Right. These are questions about the process. Anybody have any other questions? Is there a discussion?
I'll kick it off. I certainly understand the four questions that are put before us tonight. I did read the LUBA summary, wasn't exactly the most precise in giving direction. It appeared to me that they would have looked with favor upon the city interacting with HRB to at least get their input. I don't mean to say in any way that waives the commission's duty as a final decision maker. It just seemed like they were saying that it would have been nice had you talked with them. Now, maybe that does or does not apply to these 4 criteria. I certainly don't feel it waives the commission's right to be the final arbiter of the decision.
So I'll take a stab at this because I spent a way more time than I usually do reading through all of the stuff on this because I wanted to make sure I understood everything. There is no question in my mind that the city manager has the authority to make these kinds of decisions. It's clear in the charter. Our role are as policymakers. I don't give anybody direction. I don't call Laura Turway and say, Laura, I need you to do this. If I have questions or comments, typically I will call Mr. Conkle. But at the end of the day, Mr. Conkle is the one that makes those decisions. And he's granted that authority by us when we hire the city manager. So as far as whether he had the authority to say no to the historic designation, in my mind, it's clear that he had that authority. But tonight we can, as a matter of policy, say that we grant him that authority, or we are saying that we are not going to grant historic designation for, those properties. As far as the argument of whether there's a difference between a private property owner and a governmental or a corporate property owner, that seems almost fantasy to me. Corporations own things, governments own pieces of property. If you go to the title office in Clackamas County, the recorder's office, you'll find the title to this property, to this building, and it says City of Oregon City. So as the property owner and as the manager of that property, he has the authority, just like a person who owns a house or a company that owns a church building or something else. They all have that same opportunity. There isn't anything that I saw in the state law that made any kind of a differentiation between private and public ownership. What was the last one, Carrie? Yeah, so the waiver.
Waiver.
It's right here.
When 1740 was it?
Yeah, I mean, that's silly. We wouldn't, we would never waive our rights to do anything under a state law. That would be irresponsible of the city commission to do that. I don't know. I'm willing to hear a motion at this point, unless there's further discussion.
I'll join in saying that I don't feel there's a legal differentiation between private property owner and legal entity, whether it be a corporation or whomever. They both exercise control over their assets. They both have the right to disposition them. They're legal entities, whether they're human beings or corporations.
So is the commission's pleasure to do what?
I move to tentatively confirm the 4 points as recommended by City Council.
Second.
Further discussion?
Is that all right?
Call the roll.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Mengelberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
Commissioner Holiday, or
Aye.
Mayor Holiday, I'm sorry.
Aye, that's fine. I'm still a commissioner too. Okay. So moving on, last item under general business is 17606, purchase and sale agreement for 1220 Main Street, municipal parking lot due diligence extension request. Mr. Underwood, let's make this quick.
Purchase and sale agreement was approved for 1220 Main Street in August of 2017. Since that time, the developer has requested a 20-day due diligence extension. to further investigate the feasibility of the parking structure and reserving the 90 public parking spaces. That was part of the contract. The current due diligence period is due to expire November 17th. The 20-day extension would set a new expiration date of December 7th. So tonight I'm asking for the commission to consider approval of the 20-day extension.
Questions? Motion?
Move for an extension request for 1220 Main Street.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Mengelberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
Mayor Holliday?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Does anybody want to pull anything from the consent agenda?
Nope.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Mengelberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
Mayor Holliday?
Aye. Mr. Manager, you got anything?
Just a couple of updates in the last, Library Director Cole.
We have 17 minutes left until 10 o'clock.
I will do it in 16. So just to let you know that our next work session in December, we'll have a joint work session with the Planning Commission, followed by a regular work session with the City Commission. We are going to be bringing, as you may recall, last year we had several cold events, opened up the Father's Heart, as well as another facility for warming shelter during those cold events. We're going to have the county come and give a presentation on that and make a request for something similar this winter in those facilities. And then we'll have Library Cole.
Yes.
Library Director.
Good evening, Commissioners and Mayor Holliday. I just wanted to inform you that the Oregon City Public Library has won a DeMuro Award from Restore Oregon for excellence in preservation, reuse, and revitalization for the integration of the Carnegie Building into the addition of the library. And that just happened last Friday, and we'll be putting that on our Wall of Fame shortly.
Awesome.
All right.
Congratulations.
And then last, I'm going to be out of the office next week. Mr. Parno will be acting city manager while I'm gone. That's it.
Okay. Anything from the commission?
Nothing from me.
Mr. Shaw?
Nothing real critical. I think today was kind of cool. We had the Chamber of Commerce here this morning, and the chamber here. I think we had about, 60 people or something like that here. So it was pretty nice, and all the directors and everybody was here, and I think you got to meet a few people and stuff. So I think it was pretty good. So thanks to everybody for being here this morning.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm tired and we're going home, so meeting's adjourned.
Okay.